Welcome to the ASPR podcast Inside Conflict with Moritz Ehrmann. So in the first episode of our ASPR podcast series Inside Conflict, we're going to discuss the conflict in Sudan. And we will try to go as deep as possible into the topic. So over the past decades, since Sudan's independence, there have only been brief periods of relative stability. Sustained resistance of different insurgency groups, as well as the eventual independence of the South, were a result of this. After the fall of Sudan's longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir, the so-called Juba process was started with most of the insurgency groups in the country. And yet, this process still presents many challenges. While the revolution that ousted al-Bashir apparently only led the country into a different kind of instability, with severe socio-economic and political pressures seeming to once again threaten Sudan's stability. And of course, the recent turbulent developments in Khartoum are a good example of this. And I'm here with our two experts, Mrs. Manar Asraq from the Sudanese diaspora in Vienna, and a known insider in Sudanese politics. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, I'm also here with our own in-house expert, our head of research, Jan Pospisil, who is also an expert on peace processes. Thanks for being here.
Hi, good to be here.
So as our third topic, let us discuss the question of living and surviving in contemporary Sudan. The last years of Bashir's regime have of course been characterized by high inflation, unemployment, and a constant rise of prices of goods of daily life. Regular bread revolts weakened the Bashir regime and finally were an important trigger point for the protests that brought about its end. However, the socio-economic conditions in all parts of Sudan remain challenging and endanger the success of the political transition. So Manar, on the background of all of this, how would you describe the socio-economic situation in the country today, but also looking back a bit the factors that brought about the protests that ended the regime of al-Bashir?
The economic crisis and the economic hardship started a long time ago before the fall down of al-Bashir. Actually, it started with the decision of the South Sudan. And because the South Sudan, the oil reserve of the Sudan, for 75% of it is in a South Sudanese territorial. Also, the foreign debt, capital flight, and no productions, no export, and no development, no sustainable development. All this contribute to the then and the current situations. The relief of the debt, it needs time. It needs time. We feel now a little bit for example, like transfer of capital and stuff like that. After the review of the restriction of the sanction and the embargo and all of this and the international isolation, it is a little bit better, but you don't feel the result is still on the ground. It is even worse. Lack of oil, lack of primary goods, and migration from the cities and rural areas to the center. And also environmental issues that contributed also to people to leave their areas and to search for fresh water or food or something like that in other areas. Right now, the main problem of Sudan is the lack of security, I have to say, and you cannot flourish economic in this kind of situation. Yeah. If you want to add something.
Jan, do you want to add something, perhaps especially on this issue of the lack of security?
Yeah, I mean, the problem was always, this goes a bit back, that Sudan had always a highly educated workforce in the center, but high unemployment, and even Bashir was never really able to control this even when the oil money was available. Now, it's always after a regime change, the issue that there is a rise in everyday insecurity because of splits from the kind of freeing up of security apparatus. We have now with the True Peace process a lot of militias in Khartoum. We have also increasing instability in the east and in Darfur, which kind of affects people really in their daily living. So like the daily kind of living situations of even moving around in Khartoum have become very difficult. And Khartoum was, I think, and this contradicts many kind of stories that people have in their minds about Sudan, but Khartoum was over decades one of the safest places on the planet, you have to say. It's kind of what a nice city it was. But it is kind of logical that after a regime change and then a transition, these things are challenging. But as Manar said, if this is not going to address, who is going to invest like long term? Who is thinking long term economically? And what we see at the moment, for the first time in history, the Sudanese pound now is weaker than the South Sudanese pound, which is an interesting kind of indicator because both started almost after the split of South Sudan with a 1-1 exchange rate to the dollar. And now, for the first time, the Sudanese pound, which I think last time was in the last weeks almost hit 500 Sudanese pounds for a dollar, whereas in South Sudan they are now at the moment relatively stable at 400. There's certain factors influencing these exchange rates, but it tells you a lot about the recent decline of the Sudanese economy, also after Bashir fell, because there is at the moment like a problem with long-term investment and sustainable long-term economic activities because of where everybody's waiting at the moment where this transition leads to.
Yeah, and then of course there's this question of the international debt relief and the reintegration into the international financial flows that should have come out of this, that followed the fall of al-Bashir's regime. So how did this impact? Did this have an impact yet? Is this having an impact yet on the economic situation?
Well, of course, for example, the banks in Sudan can now operate worldwide, but in order to have really significant effect, you have to have infrastructure. You cannot get the debt relief and you think something will happen. Mm-hmm. It will not happen. You have to have also a strategic plan how you're going to execute this kind of stuff. You don't see any hints from the government in this direction. You just see every day who is coming to invest and what kind of agreement and have been signed and stuff like that. But everybody asking themselves, what are they going to do in this kind of situation? Mm-hmm. The inflation also. And maybe it's a matter of time or a matter of management, or maybe both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is the problem of debt relief. You can't invest the debt relief because it's money that has already been spent.
Yeah.
That is relieved. And the idea is that the debt relief would ease new loans, but in a situation that is politically so unstable, any loan Sudan is going to get is a political loan, basically.
Yeah.
They're not getting, like, commercial loans will be always very, very expensive. Might be easier to get, but it's very, very difficult still. So there's not enough fresh money coming in at the moment. I think the reintegration of Sudan in the international financial flows makes a difference. I mean, credit cards work, which is kind of what a huge difference, because I remember speaking to a Sudanese businessman during the Bashir times. He couldn't even, when he had business with the UK, he couldn't even book a hotel in London. He had no chance, whatever. It would just pop up there and would need to do everything with another bank account in other countries. He couldn't do it from Sudan. And these things are, of course, enormously difficult if you want to do business. In theory, this is easier now, but there is the trade-off at the moment with the difficult security situation. And investment is at the moment not going to come as long as it's not clear how the situation develops.
Mm-hmm. Looking very difficult, of course, and no easy answers, I guess, to any of these questions. Let us, before we end this very interesting conversation, have a look at a completely different and I think positive development, which is the question of gender relations and the role of women in Sudanese society, and how this might have changed with the revolution, as women, of course, played a very active role in the protests and the revolution that led to the fall of al-Bashir. Ladies first, of course, in this question.
Okay.
So
Okay. I would start with a little bit with the movement of the Sudanese women as general. This started in the 40s. Mm-hmm. And they have a long history of resistance, let us say that, because it was, And the very Sudanese woman who sat in the parliament, it was in the end of the 60s, And, but unfortunately, this happened with every regime, This happened in every regime. Women have no chance for have less perspective, let us say so, has less perspective than men, even if they have the equal qualification, not in the payment, products of it, not in the payment, but to get a position or to participate. And we see it also now. They are in the waiting. They were equally in this revolution, let's say so, but they are in the waiting. We see the representation of women in all kind of institution or in the interim government and stuff like that is really very poor, And women in Sudan, they take a many obstacle. They were the first victim of the Islamic regime, with the Sharia law, with the Islamic law. They were the first victim of the civil war. They were the first victim of the genocide with children and, of course, everybody else, But there is a very long history of resistance and problems for women for women in Sudan. But I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful because I know the personality of a Sudanese woman, of the Kandaka society, so to say, with a won't give up that easily. Yeah.
Very good. Jan, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. It's just to say, and this also refers to the questions we discussed before, what I think the Islamists were never able to really achieve is to exclude women from education and kind of like a certain like motivation to be part of the workforce. And I think this is the long tradition that has been there in the women's movement, also like in other party movements, but like this has had traction. And this means now that actually Sudan, as Manar said, is kind of in waiting. So like if there are conditions in favor of like a broad economic development, especially the gender relations, are one of these elements that are kind of a bit different. Like socially, women are stronger than in other countries in terms of the complexion of society, and they are well educated. So there is a huge chance, basically, and huge opportunities for economic recovery also in the broader sense due to this.
Good. So we end with an almost positive note. At least the opportunities are there. So thank you so much, Manar and Jan, for this really, really interesting and enriching conversation on the conflicts in Sudan and all the many issues and root causes and issues related to that that are important to be discussed. This will now end our discussion on the conflict in Sudan. And of course, I'm already looking forward to our the next conflict we're going to look at. I can tell you already it's not an easy one. It's not the one that is any less complicated than the one we discussed now. It is the question of Israel-Palestine. And in the next episode we will continue looking at this with I can tell you already very interesting experts. Subscribe to our podcast or visit the website insideconflict.com. For more information about the work of the ASPR, visit aspr.ac.at. Until next time.